to the hit podcast, H.I.T, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. Every week, we are dropping into your feed on Tuesdays. We're bringing you what we hope are bite-sized, digestible, awesome content for all you folks out there in human resources in the business world. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, I want to bring in our guest today, my friend and phenomenal HR practitioner, Mr. Robert Mellwig. Robert, thank you for joining us, sir.
Thanks for having me, Toby. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So if you don't mind, just so that the audience can kind of get caught up, maybe if you can give me the 10-cent tour on Robert's career so we know the majesty we have before us, good sir.
Thank you, Toby. So I've had the great fortune of being affiliated with some of the top hospitality hotel companies in the world, building teams, tribes, organization, and spreading the love through culture with some names that you may recognize, Destination Hotels and Resorts, Two Roads Hospitality, Accor, and now more recently, Auberge Resorts.
Yeah.
I'm the head of HR.
Yeah, and that's kind of how we met was in your capacity as a head of human resources. We talked a little bit last night about one thing that I thought really always stuck with me, kind of as we talk about your career theme and something that, you know, if anyone out there is listening and they might be a budding human resources person, they might get thrown into this role. And what I'm getting at is when you were first hired at the organization where we partnered, you were brought in and our firm dealt with a piece, but not all of the insurance aspects. And when you brought us in, you said, Toby, I'm on a listening tour. I'm coming out here with 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I just want to get to know all the vendors. And ultimately, thankfully for us, you wound up expanding the role of our agency. But I want to ask you about coming into a situation at an employer and getting your sea legs, assessing where things are, and sort of moving forward in a capacity that's valuable to that organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fascinating way to frame the question, which is where do you start?
Yeah.
And you always start at the beginning, right? And so great beginnings of stories have characters, they have a plot, they have a purpose, and anchoring to what business you're in, what your purpose, finding your why, both at an individual and organizational level, helps you frame and make decisions on how to approach evaluating any function, but particularly the human resources function, which is centered around people, often anchored to technology, and the complexity and matrix of how decisions are made are broad. And so finding your way to build connections and relationships and speed of trust early in your journey helps you get a better grounding and sensibility for where the priorities, where the opportunities, and to some degree where the talents and strengths lie.
Can I drill down on an expression you used there that really jumped out at me, speed of trust? Do you mind unpacking that, talking a little bit about that?
Sure. One of your earlier comments struck with me from my grandmother's upbringing of you can believe in God and still lock your front door. Those are not mutually exclusive concepts. And the ability to be juxtaposed on how you build connection and relationship and trust, I think shows up oftentimes in an interview process. And I think about the interview process as that moment where you're both selling, representing, and recruiting people to the organization, and simultaneously assessing them for the organization. So people don't want to feel assessed and judged, but the interview process is a bit of that courtship and that dance. And I think a small point of evidence of how you build relationship extension and trust. When you come into an organization, I think that same parable and analogy applies. When you walk in and have these meetings of a listening tour, the opportunity to discover other people, some of their challenges, and provide empathy, understanding, community, commonality of purpose, I think are the foundational to building that trust.
Yeah, and I wonder, when I'm hearing you talk, are you talking about both your vendor partners and your team?
I think the vendor partners, if done well, are one and the same as your team. So we think about the vendor community as an extension of us or we, and oftentimes those vendor relationships turn into friendships, as they have with you and I, but they turn into an integrated community of people aligned to a common vision and purpose. There are always economic relationships, and vendors are in many organizations falsely reduced to that from a contractual standpoint, but when done well, become an extension of your organization, just like all the other team members in your company. Nobody works in your organization for free. They all work in the context of an offer letter and in exchange for money and pay and value. And so those concepts of the vendor integration are really important.
So you guys are all over the world, and that's awesome. And I want to ask you a quick question about when you step into, what you inherit and how you lean on the relationships that you've brought throughout your career and you've kind of made along the way, where and how you sort of tackle that as far as bringing folks into your organization, plugging them into roles, and almost like in my head, I'm sort of like picturing you dumping in, looking at this organization and opening your Rolodex and going, all right, this guy fits here, this guy fits here. And I just kind of want to ask for your 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question. It may be one of the most important questions in building any business. Businesses generally start with people, and finding, placing, selecting, and being methodical about how you build and orchestrate teams is inherent to any successful business. And I look at it like a Rubik's Cube, or that professional version of Match.com, where you're trying to balance people's competencies, skills, hopes, dreams, strengths in a giant paella, and hope to come out the other side with the right mix of complementary people. But when you're building teams, there's the natural forming, storming, norming, performing challenges. And so as an HR practitioner, how you accelerate the opportunity for teams to come together and hit their stride can be part of your talent culture strategy. In our case, we look at ourselves as a culture company and an experience company cleverly disguised as a hospitality company. And so it allows us to think about the importance of internal promotion, advancement, selection, 2 moves ahead in the chessboard. And so we disproportionately provide strategic thinking and planning around internal advancement of our people, because if we get the culture right, great things happen.
Yeah.
And so that's a
culture strategy for breakfast, right?
Amen.
That's the Peter Drucker one. When you talk about the storm and norm, and you're talking about bringing teams together and getting them to gel, talk to me about, I mean, you can't really microwave that stuff, but how do you approach when you bring folks together? Because sometimes, presumably, it's existing folks that are with the company and maybe a person or 3 or 5 that you've brought in, and that all needs to gel.
Yeah, I think in the context of the earlier comment of speed of trust, I think you create conditions. So conditions of learning, part of the leadership role is to help set the stage, set the table, provide the backdrop for people to build authentic, connected relationships in genuine ways. You can't manufacture authenticity. Right. What we can do is create opportunities and moments of magic for that to be discovered. We can facilitate that and accelerate that through assessments and conversation, commonality of values, language. Often companies will use a tool like StrengthsFinder as a way to help people discover more about themselves and find better ways to apply that in building that connective relationship with others.
I wonder your thoughts, because now what I'm hearing is you're using your vast expertise to sort of solicit data almost out of people and put together the right folks. Do you have thoughts on AI's introduction to HR and some of these sorts of, when you're building teams, if big data knows who fits together, maybe they help? Or I'm curious about where you see AI fitting into HR, and if you're almost that John Henry, where the parable of the guy who's fighting the machine, building the train tracks, and he outperforms it because he really believes in people. And I'm just curious, someone like you with your experience at your level, to maybe let's touch on AI and HR.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating question, because I think there is a balance of high tech and high touch. And most of us are trying to think through the pendulum and where does that pendulum swing in any business, in particular for our organization. Technology can enable speed of decision-making. It can enable capability and provide more algorithmic validity and more scientific thinking that would help an organization reach an outcome faster. So there is a place for AI and enabling technology that can help build organizations, but we're inherently human, and most organizations are irrational. Simon Sinek, I think, says it best in terms of start with why and how people make decisions. And so you can't reduce the nature of being human to a computer.
Yeah.
And so the trade-off on how and where you invest in technology is the ultimate question and bet for most organizations.
If you could put on sort of the lens of an HR professional who was maybe, manager, generalist sort of a thing, and is now getting a step up in the human resources career and is listening for advice of someone like you that's been on the track, if you could put your arm around that person's shoulder and mention some, words of wisdom, what comes to mind?
I think one, I find a great mentor. There's people that have come before us that help lay the foundations for success, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel without a little help. Sage wisdom, guidance, and mentors are worth their weight in gold when you get that right connection. Two, build your tribe. Build the people that are going to tell you you've got spinach in your teeth and provide that ruthless candor and honesty. And that is built again with friendships, relationship deposits, and connection. Set a vision that is both short-term and medium-term that can help find ways to create small wins, motivation, and momentum. I think in the context of watching sports, momentum matters. And a single play can change the outcome of a game. It can change the outcome of a season. And I think in business, there are moments of momentum. There are moments of the professional version of an interception that can change how people find rhythm and success. Yeah. And so early wins, building on that capability, having your endorphins go off and feeling confident and successful is important when you're in any role, in particular when you're building your career at an earlier mid-career stage.
Yeah, and I know a lot of us listen to this podcast on audio, but for those on video, you actually have some spinach in your teeth. We don't have enough film in the can to redo this, so we'll try to edit it in post. But the spinach in your teeth will,
Touche.
I'm glad you gave me the on-ramp to say that to you, because I've been meaning to say something all episode long. I appreciate you coming out so much. Our world benefits from folks like you. You mentioned mentors, right? And it's like, look, this podcast can almost serve as a sort of light mentoring, where we're really grateful to have folks like you that have done this, and you've done this for decades, and you've been at big, impressive companies, and candidly speaking, you've done a great job. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. I know the audience really appreciates it.
It's great to be here today, and we value the partnership. I think what you're doing on the podcast circuit is transformational, and this notion of 8 minutes of Tuesday time, I think is the right way to think about how people learn and come together and builds a sense of community. So
I appreciate that. And you mentioned the sports thing. I brought this up on episode 1, but I don't necessarily touch on it that often. I end every episode, look to camera, and I say, make this the best week yet. And that's a Tom Brady story where one of his centers said every single snap, he would look at us and say, let's make this the best snap yet. And that guy played in the league for decades, right? He must have taken 10,000 snaps. And so the idea that the details, and you're sweating the details, and you're saying, hey, listen, what's important is for us to make this single play the best play yet. So I appreciate, you don't always blend business and sports, but when it works, it works. Yeah. And that's kind of the story behind the close. And so with that, I will ask the audience, please join us next week, Tuesday. That's all the time we have for this week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.